Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers, Kelvin Banks, and Jahdae Barron all represented the University of Texas at press conferences at SEC Media Days yesterday. More reaction to everything they said on today's show of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis and Lacey Butler, your hosts. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers, Kelvin Banks, and Jahdae Barron all represented the University of Texas well at SEC Media Days yesterday in Dallas, Texas. So the first segment, my favorite quotes from Steve Sarkisian, I react to those. Second segment, my favorite quotes from Quinn Ewers, I react to those. And then in the last segment, my favorite quotes from Kelvin Banks and Jahdae Barron and my reaction. I want to give a quick shout out to Lacey Butler, who did her first solo show yesterday on Locked On Longhorns. And now I'm back, doing one of many solo shows that I've done on Locked On Longhorns. But it's an exciting time. And I think it's, kind of hilariously ironic that, so many people talk about the University of Texas and talk about what we mean to college football and what this brand means, and so many people push back on that. But I think it's funny that every year, SEC Media Days has been in the exact same spot. Texas A&M has been in the conference for over a decade at this point. In the first year that Texas and Oklahoma joined the conference, SEC Media Days is in Dallas, Texas. Now, we can give Oklahoma some credit for that, but we know most of the credit for that goes to the University of Texas. It just means more in the SEC, and it means even more in Austin, Texas, in that burnt orange and white. So I want to talk about Steve Sarkisian, our forever head coach. And as he always does, he represented the University of Texas well, really every time he speaks. But, I thought yesterday he was really profound. And we talk so much about the growth of players, right? But what I've noticed really is the growth of the coaching staff. And we see it more from Steve Sarkisian specifically because he speaks more than the other coaches. But I challenge anybody to go back and listen to Steve Sarkisian in 2021. Maybe his initial Big 12 media days or just how he talked, how he carried himself, and compare that to now. He always was confident. He always was profound in what he said. He always had really valuable information to give off, right? But I feel like now just the way he's carrying himself, the way he's answering these questions, the way he's speaking to the media, it's just a more refined Steve Sarkisian than we saw in 2021. So we can talk about all the players and how they've developed. We've seen growth from our coaching staff, specifically Steve Sarkisian, as a man and as a coach over the last 3 years. And that's the reason that the University of Texas is in the position they are today. So I'm talking about some of the favorite quotes or favorite things I heard from Steve Sarkisian in his press conference. The first thing that, kind of caught my attention was, this is the deepest team we've had. This is the most talent we've had unequivocally. And I think that's pretty interesting to say, right? Because we're coming off a year where the University of Texas broke records for putting the most players in a draft in one season, right? They had 11 players drafted. And so you would think losing that much talent, there is no way that you could come back and say we are more talented the next season, right? But it feels like this 2024 version of the Texas football team is just that. Now, I do think that in terms of what we had at our starters last year, we may have been a little bit better, right? We don't think we can replace T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy in terms of that high-end talent at defensive tackle, right? It would be hard for me to say, even as talented as the wide receiver room looks right now, that they would be able to outperform Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, and Jatavian Sanders, if you want to include tight end. And then when you talk about running back, I think Jaden Blue and Cedric Baxter are all world. But we had Jonathan Brooks last year, right? So it's just a little bit different, right? We had really great players. So I'm not sure that the starters that we have in 2024 are better than the starters that we had in 2023 because, like I said, 11 players went to the NFL. But I do think that in terms of just overall talent and depth, there is more talent on this 2024 football team than 2023. And I think Steve Sarkisian is right. And the fact that you can even say that after losing 11 players to the draft just shows that Steve Sarkisian and his staff have this program on the right track. Next thing I want to talk about, he says Quinn Ewers is exuding confidence. He's our leader. He's our guy. Last week I did an episode, really it was earlier this week, talking about what I would want to ask Steve Sarkisian if I got the opportunity to in SEC Media Days. And the first thing I talked about was Quinn Ewers' growth from year 2 to year 3. I talked about how Quinn Ewers last year was good enough to win the Big 12, and he was good enough to get the University of Texas to the playoffs. But this year, it's going to take a little bit more from Quinn Ewers, right, to be able to beat Georgia on October 19th, to go into Michigan in week 2 and beat the defending national champions, to win the SEC, to win a few playoff games to get to the national championship and ultimately win that, right, and get the University of Texas to a position they have not been since 2005, 2006. To do that, Quinn Ewers is going to have to be a little bit better than he was last season. And based on Steve Sarkisian's response is when asked about Quinn Ewers in SEC Media Days, it certainly seems like Quinn Ewers has taken that next step on and off the field. But, it's hard to kind of tangibly talk about how he's gotten better on the field right now. You could say he's putting a little bit more zip on his passes. He's more accurate. He's more timely. Right now we're going to hear more about the intangibles. We have all season to see the tangibles on the field. And just to, say that he's exuding that confidence, like he walks in the room like he's that guy. But not only does he walk in the room like he's that guy, the team responds to him like he's that guy, right? And the fact that you have a quarterback with that much experience, with that much talent, with that much reverence at the University of Texas, you have guys that want to go to war for him, right? Like you have guys that were juniors in high school when he was starting his first year at the University of Texas. This team wants to go to war for Quinn Ewers, but he's earned that. That wasn't given to him. You know what I mean? He's earned the right to be the leader of this team. He's earned the right to be the guy on this team. And I think the fact that everybody in that locker room wants to go to war for Quinn Ewers, and Quinn Ewers wants to go to war for everybody in that locker room, is the reason that the University of Texas is slated where they are right now as one of the best programs in the country. Steve Sarkisian talked about coordinator continuity, right? Coordinator continuity. I almost messed that up. That's something that I really praised him for before and just really praised the staff. And you can't understate how much of an impact that has had on the University of Texas being a 12-2 football team now, being a, championship contender on all levels, right? Conference championship or national championship. That's the reason that you can put 11 players in one cycle in the NFL draft, right? The first season was tough. The first season was daunting because Texas goes 5-7, right? But you have new coaches that are implementing new, right? Implementing new players, implementing new schemes, implementing new strategies. And that doesn't always just click overnight. It takes time, right? But we've seen with that coordinator continuity, we've been able to build on the same success for the last 3 seasons, right? We didn't have a scenario where, even though Steve Sarkisian is really the de facto offensive coordinator, but we didn't have Kyle Flood saying one thing in 2021 and then another offensive coordinator saying another thing in 2023 and then so on and so forth, right? Defensive coordinator Pete Kwiatkowski. It's been the same message in the building since 2021. It's been the same person in the building teaching those defensive schemes and strategies since 2021. And then you move on to special teams, it's the same thing, right? Where Texas has been very, very good on special teams in the Steve Sarkisian era. It's been Jeff Banks since 2021, right? Preaching the same message, teaching the same thing. And then eventually it just becomes muscle memory and repetition for the football team, right? When you're hearing the same voice, you're hearing the same schemes, you're hearing the same strategies, you're practicing the same thing your entire college tenure, right? Ultimately, by the time you're a junior and a senior, it just becomes muscle memory. You develop and you get better at it. So I think one of the biggest reasons that the University of Texas is one of the premier programs in college football right now is because there hasn't been a ton of turnover, especially in the most important positions, right? Offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator. Obviously, the 3 most important coaches outside of the head coach have all been the same since 2021. And that's why you've seen that steady incremental growth from the University of Texas. 5-7 in Austin, Texas sucks. So we all lived it for sure, right? 8-5 is a little bit more palatable. This was a question talking about how he was able to transform a 5-7 team in 2021 to the team you see before you now that we all expect to be one of the best teams in the country. He talked about after going 5-7 in 2021 and 8-5 in 2022, right? How you continue to stay the course, right? We had to continue to lean into who we were and who we wanted to be, and eventually we reaped the benefits of that. He talked about leadership and how much that's grown, right? In 2022, we had 2 leaders in Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. In 2023, we had about 5 leaders, right? When you're talking about, players like, Jordan Whittington, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Jahdae Barron, and things like that, right? But still a very unique and specific leadership group on the 40 acres. Now he said he has about 25 leaders, 25 players that he can go to that just lead by example and embody the culture every day. And I imagine that when you look at programs like Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, the best programs that we've seen in recent memory, they may have a vocal leader. They may have a few vocal leaders, but really you can go to about half of that roster and they would embody Clemson, Georgia, or Alabama football. It feels like now you can go to half of this roster and they embody what it means to be a Texas Longhorn football player, and that's not entrusted to the timid or the weak, right? When he says we have 25 leaders, I genuinely believe that you could go to half of this football team and that wouldn't be 25, right? I genuinely believe that you could go to half of this football team and you can get the embodiment of what Steve Sarkisian and his Texas football program is about. And the last thing I want to talk about from Steve Sarkisian, they asked him about Red River compared to the Iron Bowl. He talked about how he had participated in the Apple Cup, USC, UCLA, some of the biggest games in college football. He said Red River is the most unique game I've ever been a part of. Talked about the smells and the sounds of the State Fair when you get there, the locker rooms being so close and how that creates tension even before the game starts. And at halftime, half of the game is a home game, right? When you're, snapping the ball by your side of the field, but the other half is a road game, and how you have to adjust to that, right? Both teams being 3 hours away from Dallas plays a factor in that game as well. So, he didn't come out and say the Red River is better than the Iron Bowl or better than the Apple Cup or anything like that, but he just said it's unique, right? The most unique experience he's had in college football. And I think anybody who's been to Red River or just understands the pageantry of Red River would not disagree with Steve Sarkisian. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into our quarterback, our leader that is exuding confidence right now, from Steve Sarkisian, what he had to say at SEC Media Days. Today's episode of Locked on Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Let me get that overlay up on the screen. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going wherever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, getting into Quinn Ewers. First of all, he was fresh. Like, he was clean. You know what I mean? I want to talk about that. The blue suit, the cowboy boots, the nice little belt buckle, the Longhorn emblem. I don't think Quinn Ewers gets enough credit for that. You know what I mean? But he's always dressed down. I know, of course, they come in with the suits to the game, so everybody looks good. But, I don't think Quinn Ewers gets enough credit for that. Yeah, like, he low-key be stepping with his fits for sure. He looked really good at Big 12 Media Days. And then because he's cut the mullet, like, every fit just looks 10 times better, right? Because if he would have had the mullet yesterday, it's like, oh, okay, you have a nice suit, nice shoes, nice belt buckle, look real clean and crisp. But, then you got that, that dirty mullet, right? It probably wasn't even dirty. It just looked dirty, right? But now that he's got the clean cut, you know what I'm saying? Like, and he's still fresh. Like, he just looks like a quarterback for real, right? That's why the team wants to go to war for him. They weren't going to war for mullet Quinn Ewers. But the little buzz cut, you know what I'm saying? Buzz cut Quinn Ewers, he's exuding confidence, right? So one of the questions he was asked about the A&M game, being able to be a part of the team that brings back that rivalry. And it was me watching Quinn Ewers in SEC Media Days that kind of reminded me that Quinn Ewers is Longhorn royalty already, right? And when we talk about Quinn Ewers, it's going to be so special after the fact, because Quinn Ewers was the quarterback that got us our first Big 12 championship in over a decade. He's the quarterback that led the University of Texas to their first college football playoff appearance. He was the quarterback for that 49-0 debacle. I want to say debacle because it wasn't a debacle for us, but he was the quarterback for that 49-0 beating, right, that we did against Oklahoma. He's going to be the quarterback that takes the field, right, against Texas A&M this year in that renewed rivalry. And he's going to be the quarterback that takes the field this year. Let me knock on wood because he'd be getting hurt against Arkansas. And he's probably going to be the quarterback or first quarterback, right? Really the first quarterback that had an opportunity to, but the first quarterback to take Texas to 2 college football playoff appearances. So, yeah, I mean, he's just Longhorn royalty, right? And he has a chance to avenge what happened to Arkansas in 2021. So when you look at the end of it, there's just going to be so many boxes checked for Quinn Ewers in terms of the University of Texas. he's going to be royalty up there in that class with some of the other greatest quarterbacks to ever play at the University of Texas. But he was asked about the A&M game. He said he was 8 years old, right, the last time that game was played. But, he just talked about being fired up to renew that rivalry at Kyle Field. And, it's really, based on the quarterbacks we've had, you could say Sam Ehlinger and you could say Arch Manning in the future, but he'll get his opportunity. There's really no other quarterback I'd rather go into battle with against A&M right now than Quinn Ewers, right? Out of the quarterbacks that didn't get to play A&M, you know what I mean? The ones we've had over the last decade, like I said, maybe Sam Ehlinger. But honestly, there's probably no other quarterback I'd rather go into battle with this year in Kyle Field for the renewal of that rivalry than Quinn Ewers. Adding DKR to that road experience in the SEC is going to be fun. Fans showed that first year against Alabama what type of environment we can be. I was at that game. I'll never forget that number, 105,213 reported attendance. It had to be more people than there in that. But, that was the reported attendance. Broke the DKR record. That record will stand until October 19th this year. There will definitely be more than 105,213 people in the building. But nonetheless, I think he's right? DKR has always gotten a lot of slack, the wine and cheese fan base. And, I've been in DKR at times where it was quiet. I was at the UTSA game the week after Texas and Alabama, and you could hear a pin drop in a stadium with 100,000 people, right? You know what I mean? Like, it definitely got real quiet in there, especially when UTSA was up 17-7. So DKR hasn't always been the toughest place to play, right? It hasn't always been the craziest environment. But that Alabama game was different, right? And Will Anderson, after that, said that was the toughest environment he played in his college football career, right? Then you look at some of the night games last year, that Texas Tech game, that Wyoming game, when they started to do the light show and different things like that, it just brought a completely different environment, right? And I think that the way that CDC and the staff have invested in this football team and the fans have given them right back. So I think now with the type of games that we're going to be playing in DKR, the type of opponents we're going to be playing against in DKR, the fact that a lot of these games are going to be at night more than we're used to in the Big 12, I do think you'll see a different environment from the fans in DKR, and I do think it'll make it a tougher place to play, right? Obviously, when Georgia comes to town, Texas fans are going to be crazy lit, right? And making sure it's a tough environment. The problem is like when Mississippi State comes to town, right? Can you create that same environment? But I think Texas has more incentive and more reason than they ever have, especially the fans, to show up, show out, and make DKR a very tough place to play. Just off of numbers alone, right? When you have 100,000 people in a stadium, it can make it a tough place to play just off 100,000 people being in there, right? We've seen Texas Tech with 50, 60,000 people make it a tough place to play. So now if you have 100,000 people that are invested in making it a tough time for the opposing team and opposing fan base, DKR certainly can be one of the best road environments. I don't know if best is the word, but yeah, I guess best or toughest road environments to play in college football. I look forward to seeing that growth from the fans, right? I look forward to seeing that growth from the DKR crowd, from going to the wine and cheese fan base to, damn, I don't want to go to DKR and play against the University of Texas. This really isn't particular to Quinn. I just picked up on this from listening to the press conference, but the fact that Arkansas and Texas both started this rivalry in 1894, I was born in 1993. This rivalry started in 1894, 99 years before I was born. You're telling me the first people that ever played in this rivalry are no longer with us? That is insane, right? But that's why there's so much passion and tradition and history in college football, because it's like when Arkansas and Texas play this year, I'm going to be thinking about the 2021 game. That's all I'm going to be thinking about. But there's going to be people that are thinking about the rivalry from the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, maybe even the 60s. That's how crazy it is that these teams have been playing for so long. And I thought Steve Sarkisian made such a great point that so many schools are losing rivalries because of realignment. How cool is it that Texas gets to regain two rivalries because of realignment? Certainly Arkansas, one of the biggest ones. Quinn Ewers was asked about, the SEC and if, they felt like beating Alabama on the road last year showed that they can play at this level in this conference. And I think he was careful not to say that, yeah, we beat Alabama so we can beat everybody else, right? That was kind of a trap question. But he just said that 2023 Alabama game showed we were capable of playing that level of football in the SEC. And I think that's what all Texas fans have been saying. That's what all Texas supporters have been saying, is that the team that won your conference, right? The team that you wanted to claim was down, and they weren't the same Alabama team we're used to, but they were still one of the 5 best teams in college football, really 4, because they made the Final Four. Texas went in there and beat them and handed Nick Saban his worst home loss ever. That same year he retires. That same week after that, they almost lose to USF, right? So it's like Texas had a lot to do with the way that Alabama looked. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't just Alabama, right? Texas had a lot to do with that. But I think that when you can go in there and beat them, obviously Georgia is a step above Alabama. And so that's going to be a different game on October 19th. But I don't think any other team in the SEC can say that Texas won't be able to compete with us based on what we did last year and the type of roster continuity and coaching staff we're bringing into the SEC this season. To me, the argument that Texas won't do well in the SEC is just overplayed at this point. If you want to say they won't dominate, then we have to contextualize the word dominate. But yes, I am very confident that Texas can win in this conference, especially with the schedule they have over the next 2 years. And a big reason for that confidence is seeing what they were able to do last year, getting over the hump, beating a team like Alabama on the road. Then I just thought it was hilarious because there was a reporter that asked him about being in the same breath as Case McCoy and Vince Young. And of course, he obviously meant Colt, right? But I just thought it was funny that a reporter doubled down on it, right? Because he said it twice, right? Like, how does it feel to be in the same breath as Case McCoy and Vince Young? And I wanted Quinn so bad to be like, do you mean Colt? Like, because I surpassed, as soon as I beat Oklahoma 49-0, right? I surpassed Case McCoy, but of course, he's all class. He just answered the question. But I thought that was hilarious that a reporter at SEC Media Days, couldn't say Colt McCoy, right? That's how funny it is, right? Case McCoy, Colt. Yeah, that's a mistake that shouldn't be made, right? But nonetheless, Quinn Ewers represented himself and the University of Texas exceptionally well at SEC Media Days. I was really proud of our leader and our quarterback, Quinn. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into Jahdae, Barron, and Kelvin Banks, some of the things they had to say. All right, talking about Kelvin Banks, projected top 10 draft pick in the NFL coming up in this next draft. And we really have to don't take Kelvin Banks for granted, but really appreciate him, right? You're talking about a franchise left tackle, a player that's probably going to be an all-pro level left tackle in the NFL. He's going to be one of the best players to ever come through the University of Texas. And, like Bijan 2 years ago, right? Like, this is our last year we're going to see Kelvin. This is our last year we're going to see Quinn. Our last year we're going to see Jahdae, Barron, and just some other players on the team. But like I said, Kelvin Banks is one of the best offensive linemen to ever put on the burnt orange and white. And if you think I'm being facetious, if you think I'm being extra or doing too much, like, just check the tape. He's literally one of the best offensive linemen to ever come through the 40 acres. So appreciate him this year because this is your last year. You're going to watch him in burnt orange and white. And it seems like just 2 years ago, he was making his second. Oh, it was just 2 years ago. But it seems like yesterday he was making his second start against Will Anderson in Alabama. They asked him about Quinn Ewers, and he says Quinn returning gives you a lot of confidence, right? That's a year 3 quarterback. That's one of the best in the country in the Heisman race, on the cover of NCAA 25. Just a true superstar in college football right now. And our team goes into games feeling confident, right? That confidence that he's exuding is rubbing off on the rest of the football team because this team feels like they can go into games and win every game they play this year because they have Quinn Ewers at the helm, right? We've seen teams before where everybody around, Jimmy G teams, right? Where everybody around the quarterback was just stacked. But you knew that if it came down to a crucial moment in the game, you probably didn't have the advantage because you had Jimmy G, right? Now, I feel like these players are looking at Quinn and saying, we can beat anybody. We can go toe-to-toe with anybody. We can stand 10 toes with anybody because we got Quinn Ewers at quarterback. Just having that type of player, that type of leader, that type of experience, it really resonates with the entire team. And you could tell when Kelvin Banks said that having Quinn Ewers just makes everybody feel better and ultimately makes everybody better on this football team. Freshman to sophomore year, they asked him kind of like, just freshman to sophomore year and then sophomore year to this year, where was the growth? Like, where have you grown? Where have you matured? And he talked about freshman to sophomore year was just about working on the consistency, right? At times he was dominant. At times he could let up a little bit. It's about, giving the same individual effort and intensity to each rep, right? Whether it's against ULM, whether it's against Alabama, whether it's in the first quarter or the fourth quarter, bringing that intensity on every single rep. That was the biggest change for freshman year to sophomore year, Kelvin Banks. Then he talked about from sophomore year to this year, he talked about the difference between loving football and living football, right? And just in everything he wants to do, right? Everything he does in football, bringing that intensity, whether it's in practice, whether it's in the game, whether it's the first set of the game or the last set of the game, every drill, just bringing that top 10 projected NFL draft pick intensity to everything he does, right? And he said he got that from Jake Majors, one of the biggest leaders on the team, one of those 25 leaders on the team that Steve Sarkisian spoke about. But seriously, Kelvin Banks just all class. Steve Sarkisian said if he wanted anybody to emulate one person on his team, it would be Kelvin Banks. And, I think his answer, kind of speaks to that, right? He doesn't just love football. He lives football. And that's the reason you see the product that you see on the field. And then Jahdae Barron, just a leader on this team, a staple on this team, one of the few players we have left from the Tom Herman era. And, Pflugerville native, they talk all the time about how we can't keep kids in Austin. And that's a hell of a kid in Austin. But, yeah, I mean, just listening to him speak, wow, I was just blown away, I was just blown away. Not that I expected him not to be able to speak. Of course not. You know what I mean? But he just, I mean, man, I don't know if he does media training, if that's his major or whatever, but he was just so profound in his answers and the way he spoke to the media. So, as somebody who was a communication major twice and somebody who does a podcast, that's something I noticed, when a player that can just speak with confidence, they don't just give the player answers, they really get deep and, give insight to the media. I really respect that. Talking about defensive coordinator Pete Kwiatkowski, he said he's a genius. He's shown so much growth and somebody who can help me on and off the field. I remember in 2021, everybody wanted to fire Pete Kwiatkowski, right? There weren't a ton of reasons to give him grace, right? Now, of course, it was the first year. Texas went 5-7. You could hope that they would be better, right? But a lot of people wanted Pete Kwiatkowski gone or after the first year. And that's why I talk about the development of the coaches as well, right? Because the players get all the credit for development, right? Like, Quinn got better. Kelvin Banks got better. Jahdae Barron got better, et cetera, et cetera. Byron Murphy and Andre Sweat got better, right? That's probably the two biggest examples of the Steve Sarkisian era. Jonathan Brooks going from being third string to being the best running back in the country, right? But we never talk about the development of the coaches. Steve Sarkisian has gotten better. Jeff Banks has gotten better. Tashard Choice has gotten better. But Pete Kwiatkowski has gotten better, right? The Pete Kwiatkowski we saw in 2021 is not the Pete Kwiatkowski we saw last year with the third best run defense in the country. I know the pass defense needs to be a lot better. And the Pete Kwiatkowski we expect to see going into 2024. So it was just cool to hear Jahdae Barron talk about him and say he's a genius, somebody that can help him on and off the field. And, he attributes Pete Kwiatkowski as being one of the biggest reasons why Jahdae Barron is one of the most productive cornerbacks in college football. And then he talked about the Sugar Bowl last year and just having that experience. And, they asked him the question because he kind of had that walk off the field like Bijan did. I think it was against Baylor, our last home game that year, maybe in DKR. I can't remember who it was, but I remember Bijan walking off the field that year and you could just see him soaking up in the crowd. Like you knew and he knew that it was his last time playing in DKR. And Jahdae Barron kind of had that same experience walking off the field, at the Sugar Bowl, because he's thinking at that time, like, that's probably the last time he's going to play in the University of Texas jersey, right? But now he's back and he has the opportunity to play another year. But he talked about, how he's grateful for that experience. As a football player, you never want to feel that. You never want to get that far, get that close, be one of the last 4 teams standing to win a championship and then have to go home and say you weren't able to do it, right? But he said he was grateful for that experience because now he can come back this year and apply it. This team has that in the back of their minds, and they say we never want to feel like that again, right? And that can fuel this team to making sure that this year they never feel like they felt again, at least this year, how they felt last year at the Sugar Bowl. So really good stuff from Kelvin Banks, Jahdae Barron, Quinn Ewers, and Steve Sarkisian. Really excited for the season, but they gave me reason to be excited for the season for everything that they said yesterday at SEC Media Days. Just really feel like this Texas program is on another level. And there's some other programs in college football that are on another level right now, but Texas is certainly in that conversation. And hopefully at the end of the year, we prove that we are the conversation and we hoist that national championship trophy. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.